The Stoic Systems Marketer is the concept of staying mindful when your stack, your stakeholders, and your AI tools are all shifting. We live in obviously complicated times right now. So in this episode of the Neil Wilkins Podcast with Michael Lukich, we're going to explore and unpack what is needed to stay successfully navigating these turbulent waters. We're going to talk about marketing, but we're going to go way deeper into other things too. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here.
So I've got to start. I have to start because it's only fair with the book. There is a brand new book, and it's one of those books I think that we all need to be checking out. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I just am in the process of launching my first book, hopefully first of many, but it's called The Stoic Systems Thinker. And the book is it's not specifically about marketing, as I just mentioned to you in kind of the pre-recording, but it draws a lot on my experience as a marketer and as a data analyst. But the book is essentially a synthesis of Stoic philosophy and modern systems thinking. So, and what I'm posing in the book is that this is a solution to a problem that I believe is a big problem in society, in the world, of what I call the thinking gap, which is how the world is just continuing to grow in complexity at an exponential clip. But at the same time, our ability to make sense of that and think well in the complexity of the world seems to be stagnating. So, and I believe the way in which we can, tackle this issue is to work on our thinking. And the book is a way to lay out different foundations and tools and applications to be able to do so.
This sounds the most timely book launch ever to me, because, there's chaos out there, isn't there? I find myself saying this and kind of feeling this so much, is that politically it's chaotic, both sides of the Atlantic. Economically, there's a few challenges going on. The environment, etc., is becoming, ever more prevalent in terms of people's conversations. Everyone feels, I think, like they're chasing stuff. Is this going to be a sort of a good kind of regrounding, I guess you could say?
Well, you're right. I mean, I think everybody, regardless of where you live, what industry you're in, what you do day to day, we're all feeling this chaos. And I actually think a lot of it is, I'll ground it in that I'm a math and a data guy, so I see a lot of it as an exponential growth curve, and this unmistakable kind of exponential curve, which we see in every single domain. You highlighted political, economic, but it happens everywhere, and it has been happening everywhere. And I draw on this a lot in the book. Talking about just kind of general anecdotes around. We make more decisions before lunch than our grandparents did in a month, right? So we're constantly being bombarded with complexity and chaos, and unfortunately, I don't think there's really anything that we can do about that. Like that's the nature of exponential growth curves, is that they just continue to feed on top of each other, and it just continues to grow. But what I talk a lot about in the book is where we actually have agency, and what are the things that are in control. And that's kind of where the Stoic part comes into play, which is we can't control what the world looks like around us, whether this is the new norm or whether we are going to continue seeing complexity just continue to grow. But we can control how we tackle that, and we can control how we work on ourselves, our thinking, and how we show up for life every day. And that's what I'm more interested in, is how do we focus on being our best selves, and focusing on our own thinking ability to be able to handle this growing complexity.
I want to come sort of onto the whole kind of topic of Stoicism, because to me, I find it really fascinating, and particularly how it's going to play out, because it's a real ancient kind of philosophy, I guess you could say, isn't it? Which goes back, centuries and centuries. But just for a moment, just picking on that point of what we can control, I kind of think back, as you were saying it, I think back to a Facebook post that I did probably a couple of months. I'm not a huge Facebook user these days, but I did a post because I was reposting something somebody else had shared, and it showed a very, very small little circle with things that you can control, and pretty much everything else was outside the circle. I mean, it's become it feels, at least the perception is, less and less that we actually control. Do you think that's true, or do you think actually we're all kind of misperceiving that?
It's a great question. If it is true, I believe it's probably because there are just more and more variables that are present in the world today. So perhaps what it is that we actually can control hasn't changed much, but all of the things that we can't control has grown, right? And maybe that's kind of part of the perception there. But you're right. I mean, Stoicism is it's a philosophy that is centuries old, millennium old. So it was founded back in 300 BC. So it is even still, and I'll make sure I quote Ryan Holiday on this, because I always get this from his podcasts. But he likes to point out that to some of the Stoic philosophers that we know, like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca, when they were writing about this in like 100 or 200 AD, Stoicism was already an ancient philosophy for them, right? So it was already hundreds of years old at that point. It's been around for 2,000 plus years, and there's a lot of different kind of tenets within Stoicism, but the primary one is you might have heard of what we call the dichotomy of control, which is there are things that are up to us, and there are things that are not up to us. And what the Stoics preached was that there are lots and lots of things that are in the world that are not up to us, and to spend energy and to spend time obsessing and worrying about those things, which we all do, right? Like myself included, to spend time worrying about that is ultimately going to be a fruitless exercise for us. And really where we should be spending our energy is focusing on the things that are up to us, giving our best effort at the things that we can put our effort towards, and really kind of, living in that circle. And that's where, that's the foundation for living a good life.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because it just kind of reminds us that often that when we're thinking about something, maybe after an event or a conversation has happened or something, and then we dwell on it, we ruminate on it, we go round and round and round. And actually, when we stop and think about it, it's actually that moment is gone. This thing doesn't actually exist anymore. It's only existing because I'm allowing it to go round and round and round in my head.
Absolutely.
And it's once you start kind of checking in with that, and I've done this a couple of times myself over the last few days, and I'm thinking, hold on a minute. The other person or the other people have moved on. They're not thinking about this. The only person on this planet who's thinking about this is me. So if I stop thinking about it, that thing is then gone. It's dissipated, and I can actually focus on useful things, because
Absolutely.
we do. I mean, I could argue we do waste a lot of time, don't we, doing this?
100%, right? I mean, we've all been there. Whether it's we applying for jobs and we're waiting to hear back. We in relationships, we are dating or whatever it is, and we're worried about what the other people are thinking of us, or conversations that we had. I know obviously in marketing it happens all the time too, right? Like we see this. I see this every single day in my corporate job around what are the things that we can control as marketers, whether it's spend or our messaging, our creative, and how we're putting things in the market. But we're worried so much about the things that we can't control, like competitors and the macro environment and things like that, right? So this isn't limited to any specific domain. I think this is pretty widely applicable in all areas of life, work and professional, and also personal as well too.
So where did we start with this then? Because, we're talking really high level here. We're talking about philosophies that go back millennia. We're talking about, conceptual thinking and really being in touch with kind of, your own sort of thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. But does it start, for somebody who's kind of brand new to this, would you say it kind of starts at much more of a kind of a visual level even? Would this be something somebody would want to plot out, almost kind of either list or draw out the things I can control in my work or my relationships, and then start to kind of then figure out actually what's outside the circle? What should I just let go, because I have little influence, if any, on those things? Because if I'm a visual learner, which I am, that would be a really obvious way of doing it. Is that a good starting point, or is it more about the thinking?
I think it varies from person to person. I am also a visual learner, and I actually love the idea of just starting by plotting things out. And the other half of my book, which is we're kind of diving into Stoicism already, but the other half of my book is on systems thinking. And I have a soft spot for systems thinking. I like to joke around that I was a systems thinker before I even knew systems thinking was an actual thing, and that was from just a childhood immersed in math and science, going to college and studying engineering, and then really just jumping into jobs in data and technology, and then ultimately making my way into marketing throughout my career. So by the time I actually was exposed to systems thinking, 5 or 6 years ago, in many ways, it solidified and gave me a language to describe things that I had kind of already been taught and known. But one of those things, and with that is, and then a lot of systems things are like this, is we draw a lot, right? We draw a lot we use frameworks, we use diagrams, because oftentimes the best way to convey something is through not just words, but the combination of visuals and words. And I actually have a visual that I include in my book. There's a whole chapter in my book around frameworks, right? And how can we look at the world through frameworks? And one of my favorite frameworks as an engineer and as a consultant that I've used a lot throughout my career is a very simple 2x2 matrix. And I actually overlay this dichotomy of control onto the 2x2 matrix, right? So if we can think through the x-axis being things that are, what is not in control on one side, what is not in our control on one side, and then what is in control on the other side, and then the y-axis being things that like matter in the world to us, and then things that don't. Really, there's that one quadrant that we really should be, if we plot out all of the things that we're doing, whether it's work in our jobs, or things that we're maybe not doing, like the weather, or like what other people are thinking about us. We can plot everything on one of those 4 quadrants. And at the end of the day, we should be focusing our energy on the one quadrant, which is the things that are in control and the things that matter, right? And this is, the effort that we put into the projects that we have. It's the attention that we give the people that we love. It's the, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis to better our own lives, better our professional careers, whatever the case may be. But those are the things that we really should be spending the most of our time and energy on. Whereas, each of those other 3 quadrants, whether it's not up to us, or whether it's up to us, but it's kind of something that doesn't necessarily matter or move the needle, they're a little bit lesser on the scale of things, right? Like we can spend energy, we can spend time there, and that's fine. But ultimately, it's not going to have as much of an ROI as on our lives and our professional careers, or whatever the case may be, as though that one quadrant, which is what is up to us and the things that matter.
I love the accessibility of this, because I guess, like many people, when you hear the phrase systems thinking, it's like, oh gosh, I've heard this thing of process mapping and systems plotting and stuff, and it's just like, oh, this is all going to get super complex and scientific. And I'm not a scientist, I'm a creative. I'm talking to the creative marketers here, and it kind of is almost a little bit daunting. Whereas actually, this 2x2 matrix that you're describing, that is so accessible, isn't it, to all of us?
Yeah, I mean, look, I actually try to make the argument in the book that we are all systems thinkers to some degree, right? So I tell a story, at the beginning of one chapter, which is kind of describing what's going on in your brain when you're driving and merging onto a highway, right? So you're merging onto a highway, and you're checking your blind spots. You're monitoring the car in front of you. Your body is your foot is touching the gas pedal and the brake pedal. You're moving the steering wheel. And at the same time, you're having a conversation with a passenger in the car, or you're listening to a podcast, or whatever the case may be. But it's you're doing lots of different things, and you're just doing them all in your head because you've done them so many different times. Every time that we are timing our a complex multi-dish dinner to get to the table on time, right? We have multiple recipes that we're following. That's systems thinking. And, it can get pretty complex and dry if you start getting into some of the academic research. Not to me, actually, I kind of enjoy reading some of this stuff, but I can totally see how it can get academic and dry to others. But, systems thinking really is just a way of looking at and seeing a complex reality as a set of interconnected systems, as opposed to just individual isolated parts. The thing about systems thinking is that, or the thing about thinking in general is that most of us, as we kind of are raised in life and we are trying to navigate our professional careers, we're trained to analyze things. So we're trained to take a big problem and break them down into its smallest pieces. And systems thinking says that's great. Like, please do that. That is an excellent skill to have. But it says don't. But it's also saying don't stop there, because oftentimes the behavior that you're trying to understand doesn't just come from the isolated parts of things. It's coming from the relationships between those parts. It comes from what emerges when all of those parts are working together, not necessarily one individual part. And that's a concept we actually talk about in systems thinking called emergence. But it's what systems thinkers are trained to see in the world, is how everything fits together and the various interconnections and relationships between each of those things.
So where does something like innovation or creativity fit then? Because if we're mapping out or creating these processes both visually and probably conceptually as well, where's space or room for innovation and creativity? Because I think a lot of people listening to this will be thinking, okay, Michael, I get it. That sounds really good, and it probably will give me some clarity, but I don't want to restrict and constrain myself. Where can I get creative in this? Is there a place for that still?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think innovation arises from us finding new novel ways to solve problems, or to see how different things fit together. Creativity comes from us, again, same idea, like us being able to combine different ideas, or think through different white space that might exist in the world today. To me, they're just different lenses of seeing the world, and I don't think there's a mutually exclusive thing. I think those two can coexist, or innovation, creativity, and more of a systems view in the world can coexist very, very naturally with one another.
So kind of what I'm picking up here then is the concept, or the underlying kind of mantra, I guess, that goes through systems thinking then is about noise reduction, because it feels like that, doesn't it? Because if I've got a system or I've got a process and I've kind of plotted it out, if there's other stuff kind of coming in on the periphery, it's almost that it becomes its own filter. So it's either part of the system or it's not. And if it's not, I don't need to worry about it. Is that the clarity we're seeking here?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, yeah, for sure. And I think you bring up a good point, and that's, it's part of the system or it's not. And, that's actually, there are two systems thinkers that I cite a ton in the book. And there are two systems scientists out of Cornell University, Derek and Laura Cabrera. They're a husband and wife team, and they've written a lot of great academic research about systems thinking. And their foundation of all of their research is that not just systems thinking, but all thinking can be broken down into four main rules, which they call DSRP, and that's distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives. Distinctions is the first major rule, which is anytime that you define something or you say what something is, you're also saying what it's not, right? So, if something is inside of your system, you are, by defining what is inside of your system, you're also making a distinction that anything else is not inside of your system, right? And that's, and so that's a way in which we often kind of try to think about, what's in control versus what's not in control, or, any type of system that you can think of. But I don't know if I would necessarily say it's a way of kind of like blocking out the noise, although you certainly can use it to block out the noise. I tend to think about systems thinking with a few major ideas of systems thinking, which is, first I would just say is that the structure of something will influence the behavior of something, right? So, like we often within systems, we can map what a system looks like, and then the structure of a system is ultimately going to influence the behavior of that system, and then how all of those integrated parts within that system are going to engage. There's lots of different, within those different drawings that we have, there's different ways in which we can look at how information or people or whatever, system, whatever within a system kind of flows. And those are, things like stocks and flows, right? So you can actually think through a stock is like the measure of something, and then the flow is kind of how that stock is growing and declining. Using back to like marketing as an example here, a stock we have might be something like, how many customers that we have that are recurring customers. And then the flows could be, how many net new customers are kind of coming in, and, out externally are the customers that we're churning or we're losing from the business or something like that. The third concept is feedback loops, right? So things that we do oftentimes will generate feedback for us so that we can use to refine things going forward, right? So, giving a personal example this time, if I'm trying to lose weight, my stock here is going to be, the number on the scale. If I go and spend the whole weekend drinking beer and eating pizza, the feedback loop is going to be the next time I step on the scale, I probably gained a few pounds, right? So that's kind of the feedback that we might generate to help us kind of refine a system and, reinforce the system and so on and so forth. The fourth concept is around delays, right? So oftentimes there's a gap between an action and a consequence. Back to marketing. If we invest in something like a very low funnel marketing tactic, usually that the response is very, very immediate there, right? But as if we're investing in very upper funnel brand building, there's a bit of a delay, right? So oftentimes we're not necessarily going to see, lifts in things like our brand favorability and consideration for, multiple quarters or maybe even a year or even more than that, right? And that's kind of a longer delay in things. There's varying delays between action and consequence. I already brought up emergence, but emergence just is really the properties of a whole that no part has alone. And I like to think of things like markets, right? Like markets are just the aggregation of a bunch of individual transactions, and then really all of that behavior, those many individual transactions amongst buyers, aggregate up to create this emergent property of a market. And then the final area that I always think about is leverage points, which is those small little places where a small change or an input can lead to the biggest outputs. And the example that I always like to think of and give here is more from a personal standpoint is sleep, right? Which sounds simple, but oftentimes, like many of our health outcomes can be solved just by getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, which sounds simple. But if I go back and tell my 25-year-old self to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep, that was a foreign concept to myself back then. So, and I know that those are just six kind of big ideas that I rattled through, but to me, those are the 6 big ideas of systems thinking. And, you can apply those to everything in life.
Yeah, this applicability is really, really key here, isn't it? I mean, the way you were describing that, and you touched on sales funnel there, or sales pipeline. I think you described it as. My head was going towards the broader kind of customer journey here, because what a great way of system thinking your whole customer experience from end to end. That whole lifeline or lifetime that you have, that customer relationship, that's a whole system in itself, isn't it? With all those different touch points, and you can flex them, you can scale them, you can understand them, go deep into them. Is that a good example?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I've drawn a lot of whiteboard diagrams, in my professional career. that starts with a very simple view that you've seen, and anyone who's a marketer who's listening to this podcast has seen before, is just the general the funnel that kind of goes from top of funnel awareness and then all the way down to the bottom, which is the conversion into a buyer, and then hopefully, obviously, continuing to keep them as a loyal customer. We all know that at an individual level, rarely do people kind of move linearly down the funnel, right? They might be at the same day, they might be hit with very top of funnel messaging, on these brand spots on TVs, or in person in billboards or other digital ads that they might see. They might also be hit with very bottom of funnel calls to actions around buying products or sales or getting coupons or that. And, they're getting these different types of messaging, and they're kind of, having this like wiggly line through. But oftentimes the way I like to think about it is, every individual person is going to have their own different path, which might vary throughout that funnel. But when we kind of look at this whole system in aggregate, this is kind of that property of emergence here. We can really cleanly see this funnel forming more, right? Which is, we have oftentimes, as brands or companies or whatnot, we have the most people up top who have, some general awareness of our company or our product or whatnot. And, as you start moving down to, what are they? Do they have a favorable opinion of you? As they move down to, do they consider you in their purchase journeys? As they come down to, like actually making a purchase, are you kind of one of the final 2 or 3 brands that they're thinking about selecting? Are they selecting you? We do see that leaky funnel happening, right? So different, on aggregate, those numbers get smaller and smaller as you work your way down. It's a great way of just really tracking where your weak spots are as a brand from a marketing standpoint, and where you should be focusing efforts and energy, right? If you're looking at your marketing funnel and you see, hey, 95, 100% of people are aware that you exist, but once you start getting down to consideration, that number kind of considerably gets smaller or drops off. You have a good sense of where your highest ROI or your highest leverage point might exist here. Is, maybe you shouldn't be focusing on this bottom of funnel conversion. Maybe you should be focusing at the middle of the funnel or at the top of the funnel, trying to convert the people who know who you are into people who are actually going to consider your brand in the first place.
So where does data come into this? Because obviously you've mentioned a couple of times the whole kind of premise that you have is you're a data analyst at heart. So clearly data is going to kind of crop up at some point in here. Is the best practice to kind of be building the framework of the system first and then go data, or do you kind of integrate data as you go? I'm just thinking from a real practical sense here.
This is kind of a bit of the chicken or the egg question, because I would kind of argue that they both kind of get built at the same time, and there is kind of an iterative process here. Oftentimes, so none of these systems will be static over time, right? So I think we all have to be very, very clear and open-minded about changing some of these systems. I find it wild that we are 4 years removed. You go back 4 years ago, nobody knew what ChatGPT was, right? And like how many, I can't open up LinkedIn now without seeing AI posts on every single one of my posts in the feed, right? So it's in such a short period of time, it has exploded, and obviously that has also had some repercussions in the world of marketing of what data gets generated, how people actually shop for things, how people flow through the funnel, and whatever the case may be. But back to the question around like, do we put the frameworks together first, or do we put the data together first? Data's existing regardless, right? So and now in today's world, every single platform that we utilize to measure marketing, minus maybe a few kind of in-person experiential type things, or seeing billboards or whatnot, but almost everything generates data on its own, right? So if you do any sort of, digital marketing, even if you're doing buys through, broadcast TV, you're going to have some sort of data that's associated with this, and you're going to be able to kind of pull that data in and analyze it. And, so the data will always exist. In my view, that as you're kind of building out your framework through how you should be, how you want to be looking at your organization or your business or your industry, you should also at the same time be taking stock of what it is that you're doing, where you're spending your money, and going back to kind of what you can control and what you can't, right? Like what I can control is the things of where I'm putting my dollars, right? So going back to kind of where you're putting your dollars or where you're putting your efforts, and trying to organize your data to fit into those different tags or categories or buckets, so that when you do have your frameworks finalized and you've agreed upon your different frameworks that you're going to be looking at to try to measure and optimize marketing, you also have some sort of data that can align to each of those different steps in the process to help give you some sort of read on what's working, what's not, and where should you be kind of investing more time and effort going forward.
Yeah, this is really useful, because I'm just kind of getting a sense that I can step into this if I choose to. I'm talking on behalf of the audience here, that there's a choice. I can continue to play kind of lip service to the world around me, just kind of be driven by everyone and everything and not take control. Or I can make this choice of, okay, I've got some stuff I can control. I can then systems think this, and I can actually make this kind of a process that I can then manage going forward. What is the kind of the Stoic kind of angle on this then? Because I could do that without being Stoic, couldn't I? I don't necessarily need Stoicism to do it. So what is Stoicism then in this regard? Is it a layer? Is it something that goes into all of the thinking as you're creating it? Is it a different framework that sits alongside it? Can you kind of sort of talk me through where Stoicism fits into this?
Sure. So, one of my core ideas, in the book itself, and this, I'm going kind of broadly first and not necessarily diving into the marketing world. But one of my core ideas in the book itself is that I believe that the Stoics were in many ways, they were systems thinking they were also like me, like they were systems thinking without knowing that they were systems thinking. And, this was kind of what I would say is kind of the launching point, and really where I ultimately where the book came from was this revelation, or this idea in my that I came up with, which was the Stoics weren't asking different questions from systems thinkers. They were systems thinkers, and they were asking the same questions as systems thinkers. They were just using different language. So when Marcus Aurelius is writing about things like everything is interwoven, and all parts are interconnected, that's the idea of interconnection in systems thinking. And when Epictetus is telling us to focus on things that are up to us, and not focus on things that are not up to us, that's the distinctions rule in systems thinking and actions, right? So I think there's different lenses through which we can look at this, and often in the book, what I'm doing is it's a systems thinking first book with a Stoic lens on top of it. But where I think Stoicism adds an extra layer, which I talk about a lot in the book, is this element of what's in control and what's not in our control. And I often think. And then the second piece was what I'll actually even call is kind of more of a humility of understanding that we don't know everything. But what I see, and when I talk about systems thinking to others, and when I see people are really getting into systems thinking, and they start seeing the just how much more knowledge about something they can get by translating a complex topic into simple frameworks and visuals and whatnot, is almost a little bit of hubris. And I've gotten this myself too, right? Which is, you start diagramming everything, and you get a little bit of hubris to say, oh, I've kind of mapped it all out, and I figured out this entire system. I can go forward and have all of the answers here. When that kind of that's our ego talking, right? It's not recognizing that systems are really, really complicated, and even if we diagram something perfectly, that doesn't necessarily mean we can control all of that system, right? There's lots of those things that are outside of our control, and then systems adapt, right? And understanding that as well too. So oftentimes I layer the Stoicism lens in to help keep myself and hopefully try to keep my colleagues and others, organizations that I'm working with, somewhat grounded in that. And the cleanest example that I can always give from a marketing standpoint is we can control what message that we are sharing with our potential prospects and buyers. We can control how much money that we're spending and in what channels that we're spending. And we invest a lot in tools like, mix models and attribution models and, different scenario analyses to kind of help us determine that. But the thing that we can't control and necessarily control for there is, what if the macro environment is different, right? So, there's, using an example that the economy, for example, right now, right? So it's like, if the economy goes south and all of a sudden consumer sentiment is really, really low, well, if you have a type of product that is going to be sensitive to, poor consumer sentiment and, people aren't necessarily going to buy it if they don't necessarily have, some excess capital or excess dollars, it doesn't matter how good your marketing is going to be, your sales are going to drop. Or, another example might be your competitors, right? So, going back in history here, like, BlackBerry and Apple, right? Like I always like to, think about how BlackBerry had this dominant share. I was in my 20s and everybody I worked with, all of these senior executives, I was always jealous because they all had a BlackBerry, right? And this was back in like 2005, 2006, and they all had these BlackBerries. And I know BlackBerry as a company, I've read many case studies about how they dismissed the, Apple coming in, and Apple came in and, had the smartphone, and that was something that was outside of BlackBerry's control. I'm not sure how much marketing they could have done to stave off what was happening there, right? So that was an external factor that they really couldn't do anything about, but that was kind of one of those elements that's like outside of their control, and it doesn't make it easy, right? And this is where like the Stoicism side is a discipline. It's very, very easy, and everybody has done this, myself included, of you can clearly say what is in control versus what is not in my control. And I can repeat that to myself over and over and over again. You still sometimes are just kind of, it's easy to forget. So, but those are kind of like that. That's where the Stoicism, I think, comes into play is kind of like grounding us in those different core tenets.
It feels a very hopeful philosophy. It feels like there's lots of hope for betterment, improvement, continuous improvement, because once you have that knowledge, you have that structure, you're fueling it with good insights and data, you're making good decisions from it. It feels very controlled, if I use that kind of word, but hopeful. Do you feel hopeful?
I do. I wonder if that's coming across as from me, because I tend to be more of an optimist on things. But because actually, oftentimes what you'll hear when people talk about Stoicism is they'll conflate Stoicism as a philosophy with the lowercase word Stoic, right, which is kind of more of a this emotionless person who doesn't feel and isn't hope, right? It's this person without emotion, and I don't necessarily prescribe to that. I do think it's hopeful, and I think that especially when you look at this from a personal standpoint, once you start getting the ability to frame very clearly, there are certain things that are in control and there are certain things that I'm not in control of. I find that as actually a very freeing and liberating thought, right? So, and once you start recognizing that, it actually kind of lifts a lot of the stresses or anxieties that you might have on a day-to-day basis, because when you start exploring and unpacking those, you realize that, hey, a lot of the things that I'm worrying about are things that I actually can't control. And, it doesn't make it easier to not think about them, but it's by even kind of flipping that and framing that perspective a little bit, it's somewhat liberating and freeing in my mind, at least.
It does feel really hopeful. I have to say, obviously you're very passionate about this, but there's a certain logic that goes along with this that, yes, you can feel energetic and passionate about it, but it feels, and I guess come full circle in my thinking here in this conversation, is it feels grounded. It feels kind of rooted in sensibility, in logic, in a framework that you can kind of trust, really, because once you've got this thing, it feels tangible, it feels real.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it's still around, and still having a moment, 2,000 plus years later. And it's the Stoics certainly didn't get everything right. And there's if you deep dive into Stoicism, there's a whole side of the philosophy that is all around their view of physics, and obviously, thinking 2,000 years ago has been eclipsed by different knowledge that we have from a scientific standpoint over the course of the last 2,000 years. But they were students of human nature, and that is one thing that we've seen over time, is that while the technology has changed, while the world has grown up and is continuing to grow and evolve, humans are humans, and human nature has been relatively constant over time. So it's not surprising to me that a philosophy that's focused on human nature and how do we kind of best live as humans is continually relevant, 2,000 years later.
Absolutely. I want to get your book into people's hands. I want people to kind of really be able to go deeper in this. I'm sure many people have been sort of inspired by your words here, Michael. So how best to get hold of a copy? How can people find it?
Yeah, so it's live right now, and I'm not sure exactly when this is going to be, kind of live. But as of today, June 9th, it is live as an ebook only on Amazon. So you can go get that at the Stoic Systems Thinker on Amazon. On June 16th is when the full book launches. So you'll be able to also get it in paperback or hardcover. You can get more information about that. I have a website, stoicsystemsthinker.com. And I'm not active on lots of social media platforms, but the one that I am active on is LinkedIn. So you can kind of catch up with me there under Michael Lukich there.
Brilliant. So we'll put all the links into the description of this episode. Michael, it's been absolutely fascinating. You've really got me thinking in a different way about the kind of processes and systems that I'm building, well, for myself, but also for my clients. So thank you on behalf of everyone listening and watching today.
Yeah, Neil, I had a blast talking about this, and it was really great being here today as well, too. So,
thank you.